Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the book lounge tonight for the launch magazines here. But then magazines don't often kind of look like this. If anybody hasn't actually seen it, it's not a magazine. It's a thing. It's an object. It's a result of many hours, weeks, months, years of effort that has been put into it. I'm going to say a few words by way of introduction, and then we're just going to have a conversation with Edgar Pieterse and Tavengwa, the two curators, genii behind this amazing thing. And they're also quite humble. They just sort of point thumbs at each other. The first thing, I just want to congratulate the two of you for being in the same room at the same time. It's a hell of a feat, which anybody who knows either of them will know. I want to start off by talking about another book briefly. This is a fantastic novel which came out a couple of years ago. It's called Children of Sugarcane, written by Joanne Joseph. And when I read this novel, so it's about a young woman who flees a small village in India and kind of accidentally joins up with a group of people who are on their way to what was then the Natal colony as indentured laborers. And Joanne then traces the story and of what happens when this character gets years of her life. It's a beautifully written novel, and it taught me in the whole kind of history of indentured labor in KZN is something I knew a little bit about, but not something that I knew a hell of a lot about. I'm never going to read a 400-page history on indentured labor, but reading this novel opened me up to that world and taught me a whole lot about it because the novel is so beautifully written. This thing in front of you, every single page of it felt to me like a mini Children of Sugarcane. The content in this opens you up to different worlds. It, in some ways, provokes kind of a desire to get to know something more about what is being covered. The breadth of content in this beautiful, beautiful object is absolutely mind-blowing. The quality of the content, apart from the breadth, is absolutely phenomenal as well. It is a very, very, very special thing. The reason that I am running this conversation is that I had a phone call with Tao a couple of weeks ago when he was in Mexico, which made me feel very special that we got to speak on the phone while he was in Mexico. And he buttered me up no end and told me how lovely I am and how wonderful I would be to do this. And it's like, I can't really say no to Tao, especially when, have I mentioned he was phoning from Mexico? That felt quite special to me. So I said yes, and then he also sort of just mentioned he'd already asked Sean O'Toole, but Sean said no. So I felt slightly less buttered up. But in the conversation, I said, Tao, listen, you know me, I'm not an urbanist. And you had a very, very big sigh on the phone, all the way from Mexico. And you said something along the lines of, I hate that word. Okay, yeah. Why?
I mean, some of my best friends. But I don't know. It doesn't seem very useful to me, okay, as words go, because I think we all like all of us live in cities, right? Mm. And I think the experience of living.
Just speak. Yeah.
Like this. I don't usually speak into microphones. Thank you. So the experience of living in the city without it necessarily being mediated through some sort of professional tag or is one thing I think Edgar, you and I have been working together, like 15 years now? Have been very interested in, so he can wear that box. And I'm the one that sort of like that tries to bring in the non-professional interpretation of like what the city. So that's what we wanted to do, and that's what we've always wanted to do with the magazine. And I should say, just as a quick note, we launched the first issue of the magazine. What was it, like 12 years ago? 13 years ago?
2011. Was it?
And we did it at Open Book,
first.
the first Open Book. So, and I think we had this conversation about what makes an urbanist. And I've always said it doesn't have to be a professional tag. So I did say I do not like the word yes. Yeah.
Which didn't stop you asking, I can't find the quote now, but in this very magazine, you ask somebody if they're an urbanist, and you make it sound like it's a good thing. But I'm going to leave that there for you, because you...
Oh, all sorts. It just depends on who I'm speaking to.
We've got a couple of examples of what Cityscapes used to be. And there's some more of these at the counter if anybody wants to have a look at them. Some of the old editions, which maybe look a little bit more like what we understand a magazine to be. Edgar, could you maybe just take us through maybe a little bit of the history of the project of Cityscapes and its evolution into what you have brought to us, you collectively have brought to us today, as well as what you haven't actually brought but is still on the way.
Sure. Thanks, Mervyn. So it's a long story and convoluted. So basically, Cityscapes and the different bodies of work that Tao and I collaborate on, which includes a number of exhibitions and more recently was the City Show podcast, is basically me trying to answer Tao's provocation about how do you urbanists in the academy speak out to the larger world and to people who are not specialists. And so we never get it right, and so we try different things all the time. And so the magazine was really that first provocation, and the attempt in the early days was to take the power of storytelling that long-form reportage achieves and combine that with the power of the visual, which excellent photography and design achieves. And that's sort of always been the mission. But I think the instinct in the beginning was very much, that there's a misrepresentation of cities in the global south. And we sort of just wanted to show these places in all of their complexity and unfinished nature. And just to show, without editorializing, without pushing a big moral line or a political line, but just to let these people, these places and the people who live there and write about them and document them speak on its own terms. This issue is different. I don't know, I guess we have to call it a magazine, but I don't know what it is. And the reason is that Tao and I have been through the mill the last 4 years or so, working on an exhibition that has changed names about 20 times. But in that period that we were trying to resolve that, and why these projects take so long is that we never have proper money, so it's always a hustle and a scraping together of resources and so on. But we don't want to give up on the quality of the work, so it just takes time. But the exhibition happened while Tao was curating the Lisbon Triennale a couple of years ago, and he was on the jury of the Venice Biennale. And originally, when we worked on this exhibition, it was with German partners, and it was going to manifest in a major German gallery. And I guess we both, I don't know when exactly the penny dropped. I guess it's when the Ukrainian coders was clearly running a scam. Anyway, story for another day. But it was very clear that that grand vision of this major exhibition was never going to happen, and it was a big ruse. And so Tao and I had kind of worked on a subscript on designing an analog exhibition that we will do in the Global South, where there's limited resources and you don't have fancy gallery spaces. And initially it started off as just like a creative exercise between us. And then we realized actually when that project was terminated, that this was now the thing. And what we ended up doing was to solve a puzzle, what we call a modular distributed exhibition system could look like, that could work in the spaces and for the organizations that we had come to know through the Cityscapes journey. So over the last 15 years, we've met amazing organizations, practitioners, writers, photographers, designers, architects, etc. And all of them work out of third spaces. Like they're not institutionally embedded in the university or whatever. But they're all doing stuff in the public sphere. They're all animating their cities in some way. And so we decided to do an exhibition that can fold up into a box. So Cityscapes is in a box, but it's actually in a larger box that we're still working on. And some of the other artifacts in that box includes this original composition by Nayo Muyanga, which is a soundtrack for the exhibition. We also went really retro and did a board game, which is This Guy's Madness. So all of this is just Tao's madness, basically.
I so want to play that board game.
Yeah, and there's a card game and there's other stuff. And the point is we're still resolving that. So Cityscapes is the first peak above the parapet of this exhibition system that we're experimenting with. We don't know if it's going to work, but we're going to test it quite soon. And so what we then realized was that some of the frustrations we had with this format of Cityscapes around, in particular, you know, we've always loved the visual aspect of it and the design which Tao has always led. It could never breathe properly. And what this format allows us to do is, you will see when you touch it and smell it, is the photography and the design language of Cityscapes now has room to breathe. I mean, it really, really has room to breathe. And it just feels like it's the right way to honor the incredible talent that we're able to assemble into the pages. So that's been the arc. We don't know if this is going to work. So for example, you know, the pages work as pages of a newspaper, but it also folds out into these big arresting posters of herbicide, for example, in Gaza and other places. But yeah, thanks.
Tao, if I may, I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit to the sort of the design and the conception, and I thought it would be easier for us to do a little bit of for you to do a bit of a show and tell. Just to say, so I knew about what was coming, which was the magazine and the sort of, I don't know what to call it, the pack that Edgar just described now. And when all these boxes arrived and I started opening them, I was like, okay, the packs have arrived, but where the hell are the magazines? And I sent a panicked phone call to Edgar yesterday, and he goes, no, Mervyn, those are the magazines. I was like, okay, you guys are crazy, but amazing. Do you want to speak to it?
See, I don't get him to. Just to sort of start off, this is one of separate objects that will all come together ultimately into one piece. The idea of it is rather than have this format we've been working with before, which is quite disposable, is we sort of like want to try to encourage and do something that keeps. So that's the sort of like initial. So, but also that's not precious. So the idea. And we worked with this like really great design company in Johannesburg called Brainstorm. After multiple attempts to do our own, we at the end went to people that actually knew what they were doing. And we have got 5 sections. And each section is clipped. Really good journalism, really, really good photography, really, really good writers. We really took time to commission all these like different pieces, and you will find, as Edgar said, that these things start evolving into these sort of like larger visual summaries. The reason is part of the larger exhibition system that we have allows you, it comes in as a slightly curated but uncurated thing, and it enables you to, and this is something that we want to be able to go into community centers, into sort of social organizations that are working at various aspects of things, and really kind of like work with like different sorts of publics to try to figure out how they engage with the really deeper, sometimes people like Edgar and Sophie and all these academics in here that they speak about in the abstract, but they're about very real things that people are experiencing. So what we're wanting to do is trying to do something that enables people to become part of that. So in doing it this way, and we've got 5 sections, one which is a lot of feature writing, which is great. Another one which is a series of, we call it ideas, which is some really good pieces just on people that we think have done really good out of the box thinking in various fields. Because when we started Cityscapes initially, I actually was a big fan of Interview magazine. So the initial, one of the ideas we played was, let's just speak to people and just publish these like long form interviews. So on some level, we get to kind of like really indulge that sort of interest. So we spent like a lot of time speaking to all these different people. So we've tried to, people that are working in like technology, in health, in developers that we think have got something interesting to say, but are really trying to think about how do you think from the condition of the South into not just cities of the South, that too, but cities globally. So we've really sort of like taken time to try to pull all that together. And then we have got a final section called Lens, which is this long conversation by Mpoma Tsipa with Semi Baloji, which is just like really fantastic. And the whole idea was to try to get into this guy's head and really try to get his motivations around beyond the frame and behind the frame. And if anyone here knows Semi Baloji's work, he's a Congolese photographer, originally from Lubumbashi, that has done work around really the environmental degradation of that part of the Congo, but also the extractive industries and how they're just decimated, and like left this legacy of. So you see the photo, and you see some of his work, and this guy's really thoughtful. Behind all that stuff is this like really, really thoughtful sort of work. So that's what we wanted to see. So the idea is you get this because you are interested in, thank you, Mervyn. You are interested in, thank you. Because you are interested in just getting a larger sort of like wide breadth of things to sort of think from, and you then kind of can interact with all these other elements. And one of the things that we really wanted to frame here as well, the fact that we just actually wanted this to be fun, because I think a lot of this stuff, it's so fucking self-serious. It's like boring, So we just really wanted to bring that element in, which is why we ended up commissioning music. We ended up designing some games, and also the idea is a kid in grade 10 could start at the cards, and that sort of gives him a way to sort of navigate all these other different pieces. I would like to think like these guys at the corner there, they could have this conversation using this. So we really are trying to sort of like do stuff.
It's not even First Thursday.
Oh, is it?
No, it's not.
Yeah. It
Yeah.
should be.
No, it's next week.
Yeah.
Goodness.
So that's the general idea, really. But we wanted something as well that is very tactile, and the project that Edgar mentioned that became the genesis of this was a very technology. It was a very tech-heavy project. It was all this like gesture interaction-based, very high-tech room that would never have been able to. That kind of like just took away the, the sort of tactile nature of this stuff. So I'm very excited about what we have managed to do and what Brainstorm have managed to sort of like put together in the form. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I had a digital copy which I then had printed, which is what I read, and so I had no idea that it was coming like this, obviously, and it is. I mean, you talk about the playfulness involved in the pack and the cards and all that, but there's a playfulness in the design of this as well, particularly in the way I think the sections are, excuse me, are separated out, because you have this thing of you're opening the box and you pull one out and you're kind of looking at it and you're engaging with it and oh, okay, there's another one. And you pull that out. Oh, it is like this endless box of chocolates kind of thing. And then also when you discover that you're looking at, sort of this really kind of interesting article on whatever, but the back of that is something else which you can then play with, stick on your wall, do whatever you want. I mean, so that playfulness is I think, very, very evident in the design. Okay, I managed to chuck my notes on the floor. In the Ethereal Haffagy is credited as being, I think, is a guest editor. Thank you.
Yes, correct. Yeah.
And there's somewhere in there that you reference many hours of conversation, kind of almost as a starting point in terms of conception of the content. And I was just wondering if either one of you could talk a little bit about that and that process of the initial steps of curation and how that goes.
To be honest, Edgar and I, when we do see each other, we have this very intense sort of 10-day, 5-day, and we just throw a lot of stuff, and then he disappears. Swans around, professes, and does all that stuff, and then we do it again.
That is Edgar's superpower.
Exactly. Yeah. So what was interesting in this particular is that we had this larger piece of work that we did out, and then we had all these ideas, and we then had to think about how something that was going to be film and all this sort of like interface, sort of like based interaction stuff could live in. So we then, I started having these conversations. I was in an event, at an event for a few days, and Ferial was there. And we just started talking, and she was talking about South Africa and how, even as the editor of the Mail and Guardian and the Sunday paper that she was what she always struggled with was that everything happened so quickly. You had a week and you had to do a whole lot of stuff. And also she was like, you never had the luxury of white space. And one thing that we always had in Cityscapes was that we kind of just let things hang. So she was like really interested in trying to collaborate on something, and we had a good maybe 7-8 months of like, I was speaking to her weekly. And I also just wanted to work with somebody of her experience that had sort of like this real, very textured, very rich experience in like newspapers. So that was very helpful in terms of like thinking through some of that stuff, but also thinking through what we do not want. So that was very, very good, just in terms of like the sort of habits of commissioning stuff comes out very quickly. The editorial process is just a series of like text exchanges without any real conversation. So it became really interesting in conversations with her that that's not what we wanted to do. But we spoke about a whole range of things, and she's a very committed Joburger, Ferial is. So at that time, that's when the fire happens in Johannesburg. The big gas explosion happens as well. I think the seventh mayor comes in 2 months or something, whatever the hell it was. So she was very interested, I think, in the work particularly that Edgar and I have been collaborating on, because she was like, people aren't engaging enough with like the real at level. People aren't what ails the city. And she is, I think, this was her own process of trying to figure out how she could, from the position that she holds as a journalist and somebody that is in all these spaces, how she could perhaps develop a kind of language to be able to comment competently about Joburg, not just the politics, but the city at large. So we exchanged a lot of reading. So that was like lovely. It was a really nice experience. Pity she's not here, but she had a really good contribution to this.
I mentioned to Edgar and Tao earlier that what I wanted to ask each of them to just speak a little bit about one of the pieces in Cityscapes, either something that they've penned themselves or not. And this kind of seems to be a moment there, because there are two pieces specifically on Joburg in Cityscapes, and one of them, Edgar, you wrote. Exactly about what is going on there in terms of the mayoral revolving chair and the impacts of that. So maybe you could just speak a little bit about that now.
Sure. So just to say how we treat the Joburg story. So there's 3 components to it. So Ferial hosted a roundtable with different Joburg citizens and experts as a way of getting to what's the underlying thing, because I think everyone is in that lament cycle, but there's very little analysis about why Joburg seems to be in a declining spiral. And so we reflect that, and I think it's one of the first times in Cityscapes we've done a group conversation in that way. And then there's a photographer that has worked on Johannesburg for a long time, and coming back to your point about conversation, he had such an expansive body of work on the city. We were really struggling, and Tao had most of those engagements, but in terms of what to foreground in the magazine to hang together with the piece that I wrote and the roundtable reflection. And it's one of my favorite parts because, you know, he really captures an incredibly wide array of reference points for the city that if you'd see those images separately, you'd never believe it's the same city. But at the same time, it's inconclusive about Johannesburg, you know, so it captures something really essential about the multidimensionality of the city and both its pain, but also it's still a place of incredible growth and expansion. And, you know, even though some people would regard what is happening in the inner city as just a story about slumification. The piece that I wrote, I guess, was very much, again, Tao saying, but, you know, what happens here? How do we make sense of this? And kind of, and maybe I can just segue into a larger point about this issue. So in the previous issues of Cityscapes, as I said, we were very much about building an autonomous form of representation of these cities that people know very little about, and that is often sort of typecast in very stereotypical terms. And so Cityscapes' mission has always been to just, you know, let these places speak on their own terms. Because this forms part of the exhibition system, we were both, I think, at a point intellectually and politically and aesthetically where we were interested in, okay, so what do you do? Like, what are the things, the really concrete things that can make a difference? So the section in the magazine that deals with ideas is a new part of Cityscapes because it's very much about showcasing people we think are just doing incredibly interesting things. And so in the short piece I wrote on Joburg, I was trying to, I guess, provide a perspective about what seems to be just a litany of lament, and say that there isn't a way in which the formal system of governance of Johannesburg can solve what is going on, that you need a radically different framework about engagement. And I then try and cross-reference other places that has been experimenting with how you build really deep and profound and focused partnership arrangements that allows the full breadth of energy, capability, skill, resources, and thinking in the city to be harnessed to address some of these challenges. Because in South Africa, of course, our default setting is, we're very state-centric in how we think about solutions and about development and about a whole bunch of stuff. And we sort of in denial that, the state is not the answer from A to Z, that it is part of the story, but we need fundamentally different societal relationships and institutional architectures. And I just as a way of hopefully trying to give a sense of how to decipher, the sort of stacking of evidence of decline that we see around Joburg. Yeah.
I just wanted to, you referenced the photographs of Mark Lewis, and I mean, this is one of them when it looks different in there, but just the PDF that I printed out myself. It's not, if I ask everybody in the room to just, have a share what their picture of Joburg is, that immediately comes to mind. I don't think it's this. This was, and I mean, all these photographs are incredibly evocative, absolutely amazing. Tao, I want to go back to
my favorite piece.
I wasn't going to, but okay, go for it. And then I'll go back to the other thing. Yeah, okay, talk about your favorite piece.
No, my favorite piece, actually.
You have a favorite?
Love a piece that's based on a conversation that I had with this guy called Vukosi Marivate. He's a 35-year-old South African guy that 15 years ago somehow had the foresight and interest to say, like in artificial intelligence, sort of goes all over, ends up back in Pretoria, and which is where he's from, decides to remain in Pretoria, God knows why. He could have gone to Joburg and taken the train to, so many choices. So Vukosi has started, is one of the guys that have founded this company called Lelapa AI. And the entire idea of it is that part of the problem, say around service in a country like South Africa, is that this stuff is not being done in languages at the formal level, at least, that they can plug into easily. So putting together these large language models purely on South African languages, and the idea is to create a layer of multilingual African language internet on top of the internet as it exists. And I just thought the sort of like the vision and the ambition that these guys have, and they're all young, 30-something South Africans, was just like remarkable. So that was one of those things that I got very excited when we sort of like, so it's an absolute favorite. And another favorite is we've got a piece, this guy, Benjamin De La Peña, who is this transport expert from the Philippines. And this guy has been, is running something called the Chicago Shared the Shared Transport Institute or something in Chicago. And his entire thing running this American think tank has been that our idea of transport and mobility systems need to be decoupled. It's been at perch for the last God knows how long. And what he has to say about really how we think about infrastructure, what we call things, how we sort of like disregard these like very informal systems, to the word informal, and is trying to make the case that we can look closely at other alternative systems that when you look at it work really well. They might not be perfect systems. Were really interesting because they are asking, I think, some quite big sort of questions around how we think of certain things. Yeah.
You mentioned a little earlier when you were referencing some of the conversations that you had with Ferial, something about the sort of question of time and having time to kind of do things as opposed to when you're working in newspapers as one form of media. And one of the things I found myself thinking a lot about as almost as a little bit of a thread through the whole experience was about notions of time as well as tenses. Okay, and I mean there's a brilliant piece. I think it's actually the last piece about the Congolese artist, photographer, all-round person, Sami Baloji. Sorry, and he tells us that there's a word in Lingala. This word is lobby, which is, it's the same word, use the same word for tomorrow and for yesterday, okay? And you know what the meaning is by the context of it. And I found that absolutely fascinating, and it felt to me like it chimed in a way with the sort of project as a whole. In the context that there's so much media that is being produced, information that is being produced, which is a kind of a, everything is about speed, right? And part of a sort of byproduct of that is that even when you're operating in a context where it's not about, okay, I have to be the first person to break this news, there's an obsession with the present or with recency in a way. And I mean, it permeates everything. I mean, it permeates book selling, and that's another story. But I was struck by how a couple of things. So one, I mean, you included pieces in here which were written in, well, at least 2022 that I know of, and how in any other sort of curation of information that you're putting out in a media context that I can think of, that would immediately be rejected because it's too old, it's not in the present, right? And that also ties back to what I was talking about, the tenses. So I'm interested to hear about your thoughts around time in the context of this project.
So, I mean, it's a very, the Towers he's going to break this window before we're done this evening. It's the second time. So this is indeed, I mean, it's very astute observation because this is something we debate about a lot. And I guess the main long form journalism in the piece, in the magazine is by Dean Sharp, where we try and situate and contextualize the herbicide that is unfolding in front of our eyes in Gaza in a larger geography of the Middle East, but also as far down as Sudan. And that sets the stage for another shorter, sort of a biographical piece on what the outbreak of war in Sudan meant for people living there and the trauma and drama and insecurity associated with that. And then we echoed that in one of the large-scale portrait photographs in the magazine, which we give a descriptor to. And of course, with the severity and the extremity of the genocide unfolding, there's no way you can remain accurate with the numbers, right? Because people are being slaughtered on a daily basis. And so you just, you put a full stop in time because it's not the number that is significant, it is the phenomena that the story is about and ways of engaging with that unfolding horror show that requires a historicized account. It requires simultaneously a way of thinking about the people that's at the heart of the story and what it does to societies and cultures writ large. And Dean's piece is exceptional in finding a way to account for something we don't really have words for. We can't really articulate what we're witnessing and what we supposed to be able to decipher. And so the timeousness of it doesn't really matter, because it is the perspective in the way that he curated that argument, and the way he unfolds that analysis, that for me is what's relevant about this piece. And whether it's written now or in 10 years' time, it will be equally relevant. And, so we really wrestled with this, because for both of us, we felt that this should be something, most of these pieces should be something that someone can go back to in 5 years' time, and they still appreciate the insight, the quality of the writing, the sort of visual narrative, and so on. And I think I would say 85% of the content, it's that. I think we pulled that off somehow. But of course, it is also, it does bottle a temporality. It does bottle the post-COVID to kind of now window in some ways. It does distill that. And of course, it's, I don't know about anyone else here, but for me, you kind of, since COVID, we've just had to learn to live with profound and deep uncertainty and not knowing how to make sense of many, many things. And these really radically open-ended futures. And so so I'm so happy that we didn't have money to do this quicker, because in a way, having to stay faithful to the vision and the agenda, and which is never settled. I mean, we argue all the time. But so this is still like a long moment in some way, but it's also timeless in another way. So, yeah.
Just to add quickly that I have always loved, one thing that I've always loved academic journals, the few I can manage to read the occasional piece in, because they are done with the idea that this is something that you can read now, but you can also really keep for referencing. And the problem, I've always loved paper, I've always loved magazines and print, and I'm like a dinosaur in that way, is that I always had a problem with how we had done the magazine up to this point, and we have 12 years behind us, that we were doing something that channeled a disposable object, when I think what we were trying to always do was something that you could actually, I can keep this, and you can read the pieces, and they will make sense of not just a moment in time, but sort of context. We have a piece that is on the, like what the Parliament building in India means for Indian politics, for example, for like the national psyche around what's been happening under Modi and all that sort of stuff. Beautifully written piece, which at some point felt like, oh, this is going to be irrelevant. The point is trying to be that it's not just about architecture, it's about monument, this kind of like creating this like big monumental thing that like lasts in the same manner that we've got like all these like old architectural pieces. And we had worried at some point, oh man, there was an election since this was commissioned. Would it still stand? And sort of like reading it through that lens and then doing an edit that kind of like almost like took the things that tried to freeze this in a particular moment, I think worked quite well. We worked the final version of all the text we ended up having a kind of like, we did a first edit, done, ready, and then a few months later, we did a second edit, which completely took out, and we lost a lot of pieces as a result. Anything that felt like it would freeze the thing in a moment. And also, you know, we have decided finally that we'll just do this as a biennial thing every 2 years, rather than try to sort of like have the speed of feeding this like black, sort of like bottomless hole. I mean, the internet does that really well. So, you know, and now with ChatGPT, God, you know, it's even faster. So yeah, so the slowness actually is also quite good, because you just take the time. But also there's a pleasure in working with writers like Kim, who has a piece in there. She actually went to Benin and spent some time there, and really kind of like got some texture around a piece that is a much larger piece that will appear as separate somewhere else. But to kind of have the luxury to work with writers that are desperate for good commissions that allow them depth, that's for me one of the funnest bits of the thing, because I don't think most writers at the moment are getting that opportunity. So that's something that I just wanted to mention. Yeah.
There's another thread for me that runs through the project as a whole, and I've been struggling to find the words for it, because I started off. I mean, the easy start is something around sort of the interdisciplinary nature of everything, but that's kind of not enough. I started thinking about a sort of an anti-siloism. I don't know if that's a word or not. But I ended up sort of moving towards a thing of almost anti-disciplinary rather than interdisciplinary. So many of the thinkers who are featured in here they're not artists, they're not architects, they're not planners, they're everything, right? And part of that is the way in which there's an understanding that runs through that about the absolutely essential nature of understanding the local environment in which you're working. One example, which is one fascinating piece on I think it's called A Search for Vernacular Architecture in Dubai, right? And one small part of that is around the need to get away from cement. I think it's called Portland cement, in terms of what is being used for the structures, because of issues around the environment and emissions. And so they head off towards a journey towards salt, which takes a few, and they're these kind of salt, I don't know what you call them, I can't remember, salt pines or something like that, but they can't use that for various reasons, and then they end up starting to build a new way of building, right, around the using salt from the wastewater brine. And I mean, you'll read the piece, I'm not doing it justice, it's absolutely fascinating. But part of what that echoed for me was throughout many of the pieces was the kind of anti-global nature, in a way, of so many of the positive ideas that are being reflected. And I was wondering whether it felt like a shift away from the sort of these dominant monologues of globalization, which we've been listening to for the last 20, 30 years, and whether that's a fair comment.
So, yeah. Nice if you shared the questions beforehand, Mervyn.
You know me
So
well
the
enough to
architect,
never do that.
whose work, who writes this piece, is Wael Al-Awad, and he runs a very successful practice between Dubai and Tokyo. He's Lebanese, and and he won some fancy award at the Venice Biennale a few years ago, But in talking to him and engaging him, it was so clear that, you know, the stuff he does to pay the bills and the accomplishments that he's racked up in, it's so not what his interests are and where his heart lies. You know, so he's got this incredibly beautiful commitment to research, to understand what it means in that particular geomorphological context of Dubai, to find a building material that is bio-based. And it's kind of like a little bit like a fool's errand, you know, because surely it's not possible in the desert, right? And so that story is so much more interesting, even though we could just as well have done a big set of profiles of his architecture. That's the global stereotype about, you know, globally accomplished architecture or whatever. So I think it's probably that all of that is a function of what draws us to certain people and the practice and the work and the ideas that they have. Both of us, I think, are completely uninterested in people who have solutions or people who are overly wedded to ideological frames, but rather interested in people who understand that you've got to inhabit the world with an awareness and a criticality, but that the real insight comes from trying to do different things, to experiment with alternatives. And also those are typically people who don't take themselves too seriously, right? So, I mean, one architect does this incredible, incredible work, and he calls his practice Bangkok Bastards, right? So it's like there's just a sense of humor, and there's a way of understanding that the work he does in trying to figure out how do you tweak vernacular architectures for the oyster farmers in the sea, with just slight tweaks to just give it a robustness and to really bring the aesthetic beauty of it to life. You know, he just spends time there. He can have a very successful practice in Boston or Cambridge, but that's the choice he's made because he's driven by that curiosity as opposed to doing architecture that speaks into a global marketplace about what constitutes the ever, right? Yeah.
I've just glanced at my phone, not to check social media, but to check the time. And I'm always do this, we're running way over time. So I'm going to open it up in a sec. I just want to not do this as a question, but just maybe just reflect very briefly. Another thread that I wanted to have a conversation about, but just to sort of name it, is what I found really interesting was the use of language in so many of the kind of completely different contexts. And Tao, you mentioned a minute ago the work of the transport expert and how he's sort of critiquing this sort of thing of talking about informal transport. Is something that is so important, but defining it, you know, it's been named in a negative way. There's another piece in here which I would point people towards, which is, again, absolutely astounding about the work of Dixon Chabanda in Zimbabwe, and the fact that and his project there, well, the project that he's talking about in here, which is about this construction of what are called friendship benches, right, as a means of trying to address issues around mental health in communities where people cannot travel to his practice because it's too far. And the project started off with, and it's about training what he refers to as the grandmothers in different communities to play this role with people who are struggling with mental health. But the initial conception of the project, these benches were called something different. It was more descriptive. I can't remember whether it was depression benches or help benches or something like that. And he was told in no uncertain terms, forget it, it's not going to work. You have to rename these benches and call them friendship benches. And yeah, all these amazing little bits and pieces in this bloody thing, which are just, yeah, incredible. Okay, questions from the floor. I ramble on anymore. Or we can all just have some wine and celebrate their genius. Anybody? Yeah.
this conversation between the two of you that curates the work, generates the work. I've seen that and appreciated it. But it would be cool to hear how it began.
Way back.
I think we somehow got put in touch by somebody, and we met at this place that used to be called Cavo, and I managed to get Edgar to drink during lunch. That was 15 years ago. So Miriam is like, oh. So that's, we really just bounce off things. And I'm the most uneducated person in the room, I think. Yes. So I have, so I like provoking Edgar because he speaks so beautifully, and I'll be like, what the fuck does that mean? So our conversations, a lot of them, that's where they start. You say something beautiful, and people will, and then I'm like, what the fuck was that? And then he has to think about it. So that's always how these things go.
That part is true. But not, I don't know about speaking beautifully, but the fact that, what do I mean? But to be more scientific about it and more precise, I started one of the first research projects at ACC. I was very clear that I didn't want to just do an academic volume, that I wanted an exhibition to accompany it, and I needed the artifact, the book, to be well designed. So it was a book and a project called Countercurrents that I started in 2008. And, and it was very much about me knowing a whole bunch of people in Cape Town doing really cool and interesting work and realizing they don't know each other. And I couldn't understand how that's possible in such a small Pieterse. And so the book was a way of showcasing incredible ideas that are in the city, but also then curating a set of engagements between the writers and the scholars and activists and so on. And then knowing that I didn't have the skill set to understand what the aesthetic and the visual language should be of that project. And then, I was looking for someone, and then a mutual friend basically said, I know the real deal. I know the best person for it, and that's how we met. So, yeah. I have no memory of the wine, so either because it was really good, or Tao is trying to make us more interesting than we are.
Cool. Sanbonan Nonke, as a way of introduction, my name is Nkululeko Mthembu. And perhaps I'm in a very tricky position right now. So I lead an innovation lab located in Durban. And I've been doing this for near a decade now. And one of the commissions that we have is to redesign the city logo and rebranding the city of Durban. And this has been one of the hardest projects that I've taken, because urbanism, we speak about city identity, we speak about toponymy, we speak about topophilia. How would you go about it?
Higher brainstorm, they're very good. God, I don't have an answer. I could have a ton of other questions to you, but it's a good question, right? It's how do you create a brand for a city that actually people that live in the city can feel like they are part of? I think it's a really interesting question. And what I recommend is use part of your budget from the city of Durban to buy an issue of this. You might not find answers, but you might find people that have some ideas.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jasmine Jacob. I'm actually here representing my sister, who's doing a master's on urban futures for African cities. My question is more general, maybe quite broad, because you mentioned trying to change the reality that the Global South is misrepresented. So if people are wanting to look at the Global South, including South Africa, African continent, Latin America, what kind of questions should we be asking? And it can be city-focused, but ultimately, yeah, to start quite broadly, what kind of questions should we be asking?
WTF is going on? To understand that there are certain people inserted into that city that has the real story. And there are lots of people in that city who's got a vested interest to project wishful thinking and to be able to discern between that. The people who are in the trenches doing the difficult work of making early childhood development space work, of programs to function, of running a community radio station. I mean, those are, it's not so much the bits and so on. So yeah, and it kind of speaks to your point about the logo for Durban. Right. It's like who you're having those conversations with. I think what's the methodology of the generative, iterative process? How, to what extent can you really mix that up to get to a surprise that would not have been possible if you followed the youth and development methodology, if you will. Yeah.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. A couple of thank yous from my side. Before that, I just want to sort of say, or ask you to say one other thing, and that is, by virtue of what it is, this is a very expensive object, and it's a very cheap object, right? In terms of what it is, it costs 950 rand, right? I think Edgar's thinking about everything that went into it and thinking it should cost a hell of a lot more. But part of the project, as you were telling me this morning, is also about making all the content available free online. Also actually busy putting all the previous Cityscapes online. Maybe just talk a little bit about that.
Correct. So 950, as you said. But we're also doing very low runs. We used to do a few thousand. We're only going to do 500. Process of putting our entire archive of projects and all the other issues that have come to pass online, downloadable, gratis. But also what we're going to do, like with this issue, the current, you will be able to download articles for free. So the thing is, if you want people to this sort of like level of writing that we sort of commissioning people to do, etc., it just costs so much money, and we need to try to be able to at least make something that allows us to do the next. So we are battling with trying to sort of like make that work, but also it's a contradiction. We want it to be as accessible, but you end up having this like thing that looks and feels very precious and that you can't give away, which we did for the last 10 issues. We literally gave these things away, hundreds, if not thousands of copies. So yeah, it's I mean, you're part of the larger publishing industry chain, right? That's sort of like struggling to see how to keep this sort of thing viable, and we are, trying to figure it out. Yeah.
Apologies for running over time. I could have carried on chatting to these two people for another 2 hours, but luckily for you, I'm not going to. A huge thank you to our wine sponsor, Spear. I also want to say thanks to sort of the institutions sitting behind Tao and Edgar, the African Center for Cities, which continues to do amazing work and has always been incredibly supportive of everything that we do here and at the festival, at Open Book, in all sorts of different ways, and we really, really appreciate that. The other thing I was just going to mention, coming up next week, a very, very similar conversation to tonight. I'm going to be talking to Dion Meyer about his new crime novel called Leo. There's all sorts of issues around urbanism, which I'm going to be bringing up for Dion, and may have similar takes, I'm not sure. Lots more coming up between now and the end of the year, so yeah, I'll keep an eye out for that. And lastly, I mean, I think I've made it pretty clear what I think of this thing. But I do, and I'm not going to. I'm sorry, I'm not going to call it a magazine. I am going to continue to refer to it as the thing. Yeah, I think that's what it is. It's a thing. Okay, it's a thing with a capital T. It is an amazing achievement, both in terms of content and in terms of design. It really is absolutely stunning. So I have got all the respect in the world for the two of you and everybody else who worked on it. Thank you so much for being with us this evening, and thank you for this thing. Okay.